What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now Back to the Past. I'm Alex. In this video, I want to take a look at Amnesia, The Dark Descent. With Amnesia the Bunker just 1 week away, I wanted to go back to where it all started and look at one of the greatest horror games of all time. I got my story of how I got into it. I want to tell the story, but also I want to try to look at this game and, is it still good now? We want to talk about that, but also just the impact that it had on the industry, on YouTubers and their lives back in 2010. This game was enormous and kind of what it did for the industry afterwards, right? There's been many Amnesia games since. There's been Soma that Frictional Games has made. Nothing, I think, has ever quite matched this game. The Bunker looks extremely good. I don't know if that game would ever match this. This is kind of a game, stuck in time that I think is almost untouchable, right? I don't really know if you could ever kind of repeat this. And there's been game listings of the greatest horror games of all time. This game is either at number one, sometimes PT is at number one. I don't know if that's fair. PT is kind of short. It's incredible, but it's pretty short compared to this. And does that make PT better or worse? I don't know. But Amnesia is a fantastic game. I replayed at least part of it a couple days ago, actually, to get ready for this video. But let's take a look back where it started. So I want to go over my story. I feel like it's unique. I feel like it's kind of cool, or at least when I think about it in my head, I think it's kind of cool. So this was a game that I did not actually see through PewDiePie, right? So we'll talk about that as well. But obviously, this is the game that I don't know if you want to say it blew him up or he blew the game up, because it was kind of both at the same time, right? This game gained a lot of popularity through him, but at the same time, it kind of worked in reverse. And it wasn't just him. There were other YouTubers at the time, other, I guess, content creators. Was Twitch even around? Like, it was mainly, I would say, PewDiePie, and then it kind of stemmed off from there. But this game became such a big deal. Now, I never will be able to. I'll never be able to remember the person that I watched play it, but it has a very, this individual has a very signature voice. I can like hear it in my head. I'm sure if I looked and I listened to every Let's Player of this game, I'd be able to find it. But I feel like I was just searching YouTube one day, and I found this YouTube channel that I don't think covered all that much, whether it be in the horror genre or just like in anything. I don't believe he made that many videos, and he had played Amnesia. He was playing Amnesia. And jumping to the end of the story, because I actually think it's kind of tragic, I watched it much later. So I don't think this was 2010. Maybe it was like a year or two later. But what ended up happening is the guy did some sort of post, or he asked people like, would you prefer if I didn't talk? Because he talked, he commentated, through it. And I really liked his voice. I liked to see his commentary on what was going on. And I don't know if that poll or whatever he did, I don't actually think many people voted for it, like against him talking, but he ended up doing it. So I probably watched 2/3 of this game through this guy. And then as soon as he made the change to not talking, all the life force kind of got sucked out of it. It's like, I don't want to watch these anymore. So this is how I first started, okay? I watched a guy play it. I mean, that's a very long story to basically say that. I watched a person play this game. But the game looked insane. It looked incredibly scary. It looked incredibly cool. And then what I did, I went over to my friend's house, and I remember this night very, clearly. I had a sleepover, and I was at my friend's house, and we had another close friend. Us three were extremely, extremely close growing up, and we still are now. But all three of us were at this one friend's house. And at night, when we were upstairs in his room, I pitched them. We would just talk before you would, go to sleep. And I pitched them. I said, I've been watching a game called Amnesia. And I pitched just the earliest concepts of these monsters, and you can't fight them, you have to run away, and the sanity, the keys of this game. And I pitched it to them, and I just remember them smiling and this energy to them, that they were super intrigued with this game. And the next day we bought it. We just bought it on Steam, and we started playing it. And I actually think I owned it, because I'm pretty sure I bought it. I had a laptop, so I was the one playing it. And we played it together. We only played kind of the beginning together. I would later go on to beat the game. But we played the beginning, and the rest is kind of history. So I remember that night so clearly, just this very elevator pitch of, here's the game. I think it's terrifying. And the game is terrifying. So a little bit of like what makes this game so great, right? I was watching a couple other video essays of a few years ago talk about this game, and I do think it's fair to kind of put yourself back in that time, even though I didn't really care and I wasn't really part of it. You go back to like 2010 and you go back before then, right? Really, probably after like a Resident Evil 4 thing. So you're thinking like maybe a little bit after 2005, but Silent Hill has largely dropped off. You did have Dead Space, which was 2008, right? It wasn't completely barren, but these kind of games, let's say, overall, they were kind of shaky. Now, I know there's always been debates like in the horror community where when people kind of talk about horror games, they tend to forget about the indie games that really drive the industry. And so much of it, like when you say, oh, Silent Hill 2 is back, like horror gaming is back, people get really, really mad at that. And I think rightfully so, because it's like, hey, dude, like it's always been around, right? Like it's always, it's still thriving, and the indie scene is where these things kind of take off in the first place. I mean, that is kind of true. I mean, you think about it, right? So generally, again, you had Dead Space, you had a few things, but generally horror wasn't in the greatest spot of all time. And then this game comes out, and it is an indie game. And this game, it sold well at launch, but again, because of the influencers or the streamers or the YouTubers, you'd probably just call them back then, right? Because of them and this kind of synergy that they had, this game picked up. This game just sold over and over and over. And I think like about a year or so in, they were still selling like 6,000 units like a week. Like they were doing extremely, extremely well. The game just kept growing. And I think, okay, well, obviously like the shock factor of, well, you see this little creature here, which always scared the living daylights out of me. As I got older, I got to a point where it's like, just look at them. Like these kind of things, or like a Slender Man, like that game. So like, just look at those enemies, and sometimes, they're not all that scary. I don't know, like if you really examine this guy, does he look, I mean, he kind of looks weird. He kind of looks a little scary, but the game just does such a good job of putting you in that world. You think about it, you're in a castle, dark castle, very little lighting. You have like wind, and you have like openings of the wall. You have like kind of like broken pieces, right, of this castle. So I think in terms of the atmosphere, they did an excellent job. And it's not new, the idea of having amnesia. It's not new being able to just run away and not being able to fight. But I think at the time, it just put those things together in a way that any game before it, over the last maybe 2, 3, 4 years before it, just failed to do. Again, I keep thinking of Dead Space. I mean, Dead Space was just such a different game. Primarily, you could say just for an easy reason that you could fight. You could fight in it. But I remember, and for all of these games, PT, I did it as well, I go through them extremely, extremely slowly. These are not games that I should run, because like I'm always afraid of these games, so I should just try to like rush through it. But I normally like stand at the end of a hallway, look down it, and say, no, like I'm not going to do it. And I did that for PT. I did that for this game, where you just kind of like wait it out. And even, I'm a grown adult, okay? I played this game getting ready for it. And the beginning, I think, is just so iconic, reading the letter of yourself, talking to yourself, right? And, your name is Daniel and all this stuff, and you have to go kill Alexander and all. It's so classic. And even the first couple rooms that you go in, and, a door gets blown open, it's like, oh my God, it's so terrifying. Now, like the visuals don't exactly look great, but I think because of the sanity and because of, I don't know, it hasn't aged like amazingly, but it hasn't aged poorly either. Like it looks fine. And because of the sanity of things like slanting and kind of like moving across itself, I love it. I think the sanity in this is one of the coolest features of the game, staying in the light, versus the darkness. Hearing, when you're not in the light and stuff, how you'll kind of like see either cockroaches, or he won't grind his teeth, but he'll close it. I don't know if you can hear that in the mic, but when you can close your teeth over and over, that chattering, the chatterer in Hellraiser, right? Kind of like that. And which I didn't know about. I didn't know about Hellraiser back in the day. That was something that always stood out to me too. Just the things that Daniel would do when you start to lose sanity. And then really the forcing of like, there's a couple moments in this game where you are forced to like run away, like that enemy is on you. You run away, you close the door on them, and figure out like a place to hide, because like that enemy's coming. And even like the first time it introduces you to it, they kind of do that where they get you ready. They're like, okay, you can hide in certain places and get ready because here we go. And then you have to do it. It just did everything so well. The story it's simple, but it's actually kind of complex. I think the reason I say it's simple is because a lot of the things you find are through like notes, and sometimes it's, like voiceover, like they'll read it out for you. But if you want to like ignore the story overall and you're just in it for the scares, which honestly I do think a lot of at the time like the YouTubers were there for, I think the game still works. I actually think that's part of what makes this game so special. It is an incredible horror game. It doesn't just rely on one monster, by the way. That water monster is, I remember the first time I saw that, and I did see that through the walkthrough. And I was terrified watching the guy play. And it's like, I'm not even, the one playing it. But it's scary. Like, obviously, there's nothing there. But you see, like, the splashes of the water moving towards you. And you have to throw, the body parts to kind of get it distracted. It's like, it's very smart. And again, it doesn't just rely on kind of one thing. And then if you want the story element, that's there. You can do it. And it spawned a franchise. It really spawned the studio too. Like, I really like Soma. Again, I'm interested quite a lot in Amnesia the Bunker. I'm going to hopefully be playing that day one. So this game started it all kind of for them. It definitely, I think it reinvigorated the horror genre, helped some YouTubers out, helped PewDiePie out. But again, it did for PewDiePie and for the other YouTubers kind of what like Among Us did, where like, again, because here's the thing, you can't just like, if the game sucks, it's not going to help. YouTubers can only do so much about it. I actually saw another video that said that, like, yes, they benefited off of it, but at the same time, like, if the game is just pure garbage, you could say it for Fall Guys, you could say it for Among Us, more modern party kind of games. Well, same thing for back then. Like, these scares, they're not fully brought out because of the PewDiePies or the Markipliers, whatever, of the world. It's more of an equal kind of footing because the game itself is legitimately scary. This game is one of the scariest games of all time. I truly believe so. So I will say this. It's never actually been, maybe like when I first saw it was my favorite horror game. But I actually played very little horror games. Well, growing up, I don't think I played like any. And then even in my teenage years, didn't really, go out that much into them, like the Resident Evils and Silent Hill, to an extent. But for the most part, it was really as I got older in my teenage years with the Until Dawns of the world and Outlast and PT and things like that. I've always said like Until Dawn, I do think is like my favorite horror game, period. It's a different kind of horror game for sure. So if we're putting them in different genres, and I would also say, replaying this now, and I didn't play too much of it. I played like an hour of it just to kind of get my feet wet, re-experience some of it. The game's terrifying. Like the game, it just immediately you are in this world, and the atmosphere that it provides you with is top tier. Even as the visuals, continue to age, you still are uneasy. And I forget like when things are supposed to happen, right? So when you're going around and you hear like the wind or you hear something close or whatever, and again, I feel like that's almost them like testing you, saying like, hey, things are going to happen in this game. Right now we're kind of messing with you, but eventually we're going to give you real things to be afraid of and to run away from. Like that's later on. In the beginning, it's more like toying with you. It's scary. I think PT is maybe the only game. PT was like almost unplayable for me because it was that terrifying. PT is probably the scariest game I've ever played. Amnesia is probably the second one. But in terms of the impact and importance of this game, it's absolutely up there. It's one of the most important games in my lifetime. It's one that I kind of participated in, but again, I feel like I helped a smaller YouTuber back in the day of watching his walkthrough. I never watched PewDiePie's or anything like that until kind of after kind of realizing this joint little business agreement that everybody kind of had. I wasn't part of that, but I was, I think, generally a part of this Amnesia movement, if not just a little bit later. So let me know what you guys think about this game leading into the bunker. Let's see if the bunker can do it. Now, the bunker's going to have fighting back, right? So you got guns, you got grenades, you can fight back. We'll see how they can do with that, like if it's going to work in the Amnesia formula. Make sure you're subscribed, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.